Welcome to Cultivate, a space where we talk about building, growing, and figuring it out as you go. I'm your host, Alex Canavan, and I am so glad you're here with us today. Quick favor before we dive in, if you're enjoying these conversations, be sure to hit subscribe. It's free, it takes 2 seconds, and it genuinely helps the show grow. Plus, it'd mean the world to me. Now, today's guest. My guest today is Dr. Kaushal Nanavati, Assistant Dean of Wellness and Director of Survivorship and Integrative Medicine at Upstate University, a motivational speaker, author, and integrative family physician at Upstate Medical. His work centers on wellness, self-care, and helping people achieve real contentment and peace in their lives. And he does it using humor, storytelling, and tangible, real-world examples instead of empty advice. Today, we're getting into something I think a lot of us need to hear: the rules of engagement for our relationships, and what human flourishing actually looks like beyond just being happy or successful on paper. We talk about relationship patterns that look healthy but aren't, the difference between a relationship that's growing you and one that's harming you, boundaries, community, and what it really means to flourish, not just perform wellness for everyone else to see. I think this conversation is going to inspire you to live life to the fullest right here and right now. All right, let's dive in. Kaushal Nanavati, welcome to Cultivate.
Thank you. This has been a long-awaited, meeting, right?
Long time coming. You are very much loved and appreciated in the Central New York community. The work that you've done throughout your career is not only so important, the lives that you're touching specifically through your practice and the patients that you work with, but the fact that you wrote this incredible book and you have this desire to truly make the world a better place for all humans. I deeply admire your effort and just the work that you're doing.
I appreciate that.
So there's so much that we could get into, and just sitting down before we were recording, I mean, we got into some really important topics, but I want to talk to you today about human flourishing. What are some of the key components that a flourishing human inserts in their day every day?
There are experts in the world who are right now talking about flourishing and defining and redefining it. If you ask me, I think one of the most important things about flourishing is self-acceptance. So often we go through this journey with expectation, right? Assumption, these goals that we set, these wants that we have, the longings that we have, the missed opportunities we're stuck on or hung up on. And the idea of flourishing is really rooting yourself in self-acceptance, self-love. And as you do that, what starts to happen is the blossoming of you, which is the flourishing of you, happens. And along that journey, when you start to realize that each step in that journey is a flourishing step, and that what we seem or deem as failures or the less than moments are actually opportunities for learning, which are, again, a part of growth, part of flourishing. So if you take a seed and you sow it in the ground, right, how does that flourish into a tree? At each step, it requires different aspects, right? So at each step of your journey, there are going to be different components that define what flourishing is. Contentment and peace, these are things that aren't statics in our life, they're dynamics. And so flourishing isn't something that once you figure out, now you're going to flourish. It's something you come back to at different stages of your life to examine, to inspect, to prospect, looking forward, looking at the past, and then embracing the present. That's flourishing.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, because I think that most of us, when we think of what flourishing is or means, it's almost like this final destination. I'm going to flourish once I've accomplished these things, once I've become this person, and then I'll flourish and the rest is history.
Yeah.
But what you're explaining is that flourishing is a conscious decision to be content and at peace and accepting of the lives that we're living right now, whether or not on paper we might be doing well, or whether or not our health might be the best it could be, we can flourish wherever we are right now. Is that right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a mindset. More than anything else, it's a mindset.
For anyone listening right now that would like to feel like they're flourishing, but they might be erring on the side of someone who's constantly anxious or someone who's constantly longing for the life that they're not living yet, what would you say to them?
So that's kind of the whole self-judgment, self-critique kind of thing, right? So acceptance and forgiveness lead to contentment and peace. And we have to start with ourselves, right? And most of us don't even acknowledge ourselves. If I ask you right now, right off the top of your head, who do you consider your most meaningful relationship right now? Who would you say?
I think it naturally, when you hear that question, you would think outside of yourself.
That's right.
Right. But
Right.
I know the right answer.
You've heard me say this before, possibly.
Yes. And
But
I also am like one of those people that listens to very wise, conscious folks like yourself and have learned over time, okay, I know the right answer to this.
Yes.
The teacher's pet in me
That's right.
knows what I should say, but the human in me would probably think of my family, my partner, my best friend.
Yep. And that's the difference, right? I've asked probably at least, several thousand people this question, and maybe 6 or 7 have said myself, right? And so when we start to value self, then what happens is we fill our cup, right? And once we fill our cup, and so when I said, it's a mindset, it's also a heart set, flourishing. And that's the idea of self-love, self-compassion. We use words like selfish as being negative, but self-love, self-respect, self-compassion, right? These are actually positive ways to be selfish, which is to feed your soul, to feed your mind, to feed your heart, and then to share the overflow, which you can then share unconditionally. If I empty my cup, now I'm seeking. And now I have an expectation and I have assumptions, right? And I have these criteria upon which I'll build a life versus embracing what's coming and then valuing self and then creating a value set with which I can relate to others and with them as well, right?
I am curious. I mean, I think on this topic of human flourishing and just overall happiness, how do we become happy humans? I think a lot of that, I mean, first things first, obviously we have to have a happy relationship to ourselves. We have to like ourselves, enjoy being with ourselves. But I also think that human connection and relationships contribute a lot to our overall happiness. And as someone who is, I would say I'm very good at filling my own cup. I'm very good at putting myself first, even though I was certainly raised by people that believed putting themselves first at all was selfish. I've had to really break this cycle and this mindset around what it means to be a healthy, autonomous human, but also still be of service to others and to be a good villager, right?
Right.
I am truly my happiest when I am putting my needs first where they need to be, doing the things every day that fill my cup, diving into things I'm passionate about, spending time learning and growing my business, my things. But on the other side, I've also found myself fall into codependency in relationships, and not just romantic, but in friendships. What would you say about codependency? I think it's actually quite common. I think it's a natural human experience to easily fall into codependency.
I think so. I mean, I think, you've made like a bunch of points in that commentary. So I'll kind of address all of them. So meaningful relationships are thought to be one of the most important factors for happiness. What we know about happiness is people who hinge their happiness on outcomes, they tend to yo-yo through life. If you get what you want, you're happy. If you don't, suddenly you're not, right? Sad, mad, whatever, jealous, angry, whatever it is, right? People who have a sense of what we call durable plentitude, which is I'm good. Sometimes things work out, sometimes things they don't, right? So this idea of focusing on the input rather than the outcome, they have the potential to have sustained happiness. So many of us are, again, we've used this word several times, pre and on this, expectation, right? Caught up in that expectation of how things are supposed to be before they even get there. that they don't afford the opportunity for the experience, the relationship, right, to actually inform how the journey is going to be versus coming in with a preset notion. And preset notions are very limiting. I tell my, medical students in orientation, I'm like, leave your 6-year-old's dream at the door. Because you haven't even experienced this and you're walking in thinking, I want to be a neurosurgeon or a family doc or a pediatrician, but you haven't even done the thing to know how you're going to blossom. So to bloom, you nurture, and then you allow that natural growth, right? And you embrace that natural growth. When it comes to relationships and codependency, what starts to happen is, based on expectation, we start to settle into. And so when we start to actually pause to actually see with clarity, now you can actually understand the other versus focusing on trying to get them to understand you, right? And the minute we're open to that, what we do is find a natural common ground versus a forced persona based on assumed expectation. And we talked about this earlier, assumption and expectation, right? These are the things that end up leading to more distress than what we call eustress, which is a positive stressor. So relationships can have conflict, relationships can have disagreements. On the other side of that, if we're both better communicators, able to feel more comfortable being vulnerable, learn how to be vulnerable, right? Then that is actually what flourishing in relationship is, versus at the end of those discussions, you shrink up. Or you have more barriers than you do bridges, right? And then what happens is now there's distancing, right? So I like to say relationships are like a ladder, right? The two posts held together by the rungs. Those rungs, trust, honesty, vulnerability, compassion, love, all those factors that bring us together have to come from both sides. Otherwise, they tend to drift. And so it's a consistency that comes over time. And as our man Denzel says, right? Discipline and consistency, right? If you want to achieve your dreams, you need discipline and consistency. If you want to have healthy relationships, it requires discipline and consistency, right? Being present for, being present with, right? Rather than being present for getting, is being present for giving as well. And both should be allowed and accepted.
I think that is a really important point, this idea of getting but also giving. And we hear the term on social media a lot now, you want a village, you have to be a good villager. And I think just in general, human beings in 2026 have lost the art of maintaining relationships and nurturing them and deepening them, and the art of getting together and reaching out and checking on one another. Why do you think that is? Do you think it's because we live in a digital world now? Do you think it's because of the pandemic? And whatever that is, how do you think we can become better in relationship?
So those are 2 points again. I'm going to parse them and I'm going to tease you all day long as we do this, right? So
I have a lot of questions for you.
yeah, that's fantastic. Because do I think that we're going down the wrong path? I don't know about that. I think we're evolving. Okay. And I'll give you the example. So I'm 54. So technically my generation stereotypically would say things like social media are, disrupting society and the development of youth in a negative way. And there's data that supports that too. At the same time, AI and how it can potentially harm and all of this. I don't know that it's bad. I just think we haven't figured out the value of these and utilize them in a healthy way. I can tell you, I was class president in high school, and when we did our 20-year reunion, I don't think I would have done it without social media. I wouldn't have been able to connect with people. When I think about even how we've connected, and many of our in Central New York wellness friends have connected, right? We've met through social media. Right? So how do you say that's a bad thing when it's been a tool, right? And if you know how to utilize a tool for betterment, there's value. If you utilize it as a detriment, then there's that, right? So I don't know that it's necessarily that we don't know how or that we're going down the wrong path. What we haven't done is put the right spotlight and give it the positive spin enough, even in society, to say, here's a great tool that with which we can do this versus, uh, I'm never gonna. I have colleagues who are not on social media. As a healthcare provider, I think that how do you not when that's where the people are? If you have millions of people who are doom scrolling, I'd rather have them positive scroll on healthy things that will invite joy into their life, right? Not with blinders on, but with actual tangible positive pearls. And so that to me is the potential of seeing the upside, right? As I told you, I'm more of a positive psychology guy. I think there's an upside to a lot of this stuff. But as a social context and Western society often is fear averse. And so what happens is we tend to see the half empty when it's also half full. And more importantly, the opportunist, this is the funny part of it, the opportunity says, you know what, I got a free drink, right? They don't care if it's half full or half empty,
Yeah.
right? So why can't we be positive about that, right? And I think that would make a big, big difference. I think in terms of relationship building, I think your generation is doing it differently, right? And even younger generations are doing it differently. And so there's judgment from older generations who don't quite get it. Right? When I started teaching at Upstate 15 years ago, first time a student opened up a laptop while I was presenting to them, right? I'm like, you're not looking at me. What are you doing? Right? Put that laptop away. They're like, well, I'm taking notes. And I'm thinking paper and pen, and they're doing laptop. Suddenly, I see a student on a phone while I'm presenting. I'm like, what, you got a hot date or something? And they're like, no, I'm looking up what you're telling me. Right? I'm looking at the evidence. And so cultural context changes, generations change. And so often all of us tend to judge based on our norms, right? And it goes both ways. I tell my students, you need to understand the norms of the patients that you're going to be seeing, because the 70-year young person that you're going to be seeing, their generational context and the norms of their language and even the TV shows they watch, right? In the 70s, right? And the 80s, like now, most of them would be canceled. Right? But that was the norm of the day, and that was the norm of their thought. We have to understand and be open to finding common ground. I think that's the most important thing for relationship is how do we find common ground? It's trust, it's vulnerability, right? It's pausing the response so you can actually absorb the content first, understand it, let it settle, gate clarity, and then you respond versus that reactionary, yeah, but no, but, well, I don't. Pause. Let them finish, right? So often we don't let the other finish. And the more engaged we are, the less we give them a chance.
I think with social media, you're right. Social media was truly invented, I think, to make people more in relationship, more connected. And it was intended to be this beautiful thing. Of course, there's evil in the world and bad things happen no matter how much you try to innovate, right? But I do think that there are some people that will use social media to their advantage, will make their lives more full through it. And then there's also a lot of people now that have almost like decided, I'm going to hit the easy button and I'm not going to get in person and I'm not going to contribute and pour into other people, but I'm going to go on social media and I'm going to scroll and I'm going to consume their content and I'm going to almost live vicariously through them and have a parasocial relationship with this person.
Right.
And I'm going to still feel like my relationship needs are filled up because I feel like I do know what's happening in this person's life because I looked at their posts and I may have liked it. But I think it's important for us all to remember that social media is just such a small sliver, and whatever anyone chooses to post, it's just odd to me too, because, you know, I have people in my life with teenagers.
Yeah.
And growing up, I was never home. I was always at a friend's house. I was always out and about. I had a very, very full social life. But I have friends with teenagers who will spend a majority of their time in their room on Snapchat talking to their friends, but will not actually spend any time with their friends outside of school. And that's what their friendships look like now. They're living in isolation physically. It's just a very shocking lifestyle to me when I look back and look at the life I was living as a teenager, and I don't know who I would be today if I didn't have all those in-person
engagements, right?
experiences
Experiences.
with
I
people.
completely agree with that. So that is one of the detriments of that, right? Yesterday, I met somebody who said, "Yeah, my best friend lives, somewhere else." I'm like, "Oh, yeah." So, and they're like, "Yeah, we've never met." They've only met on social media, right? And to the point where they're like, yeah, if something happened and I didn't have anybody else, I could go live with them. I'm like, you've never met. You have no context except what you know on. And so again, judgment, when does that develop? Well, we know young minds are very, easily influenced. And so, do we need some guards? Do we need some parameters that engage and engender safety? Absolutely, right? Absolutely. But all of that being said, it's how you utilize the tool, right? A hammer isn't bad. And some people think, well, the nail must hurt because the hammer is hitting it all day long. But the purpose of the hammer is to hit the nail, and the purpose of the nail is to then hold whatever structure in place. So, is it an act? I heard something recently that, if you're a hammer, hit hard, right? And it's like, well, it's actually an act of love from the hammer to the nail. And so what we perceive from the outside in, what is actually happening from the inside out, aren't always aligned. And for young people to have meaningful engagement so they can have conversations about what they're experiencing, I think that and some the work that you've done in cultivating, right? I'll use that word for you, in cultivating connection
Yeah.
in person. And that's one thing that, my wife and I talk about a lot is how do you get people to have meaningful connection? Even online, at least live conversations, right? And connections, engagement, the ability to express, right? Fully. Those are all positive, but in person is still one of the most healthy forms of relationship building, not just with others, with yourself. Because oftentimes in the group, you can see yourself just with how you express, how you respond, how you react. You get clarity on who you are, right? And what your boundaries are. And boundaries are bridges more so than they are walls, right? If you create healthy ones, because now people have an awareness of how to engage with you and how comfortable you are engaging in certain ways to certain times, right? So, I think you're absolutely right. It's not all one or the other. However, as a social paradigm, if we're able to actually create a process of flow parameters for different stages of life and the requirements for each stage of life, they're different. So we can't assign one statement to the whole. At the same time, each subgroup has different requirements, just like the sprouting of the seed. Underground, it's got different process. Above ground, it's got different flow. Both have value, but one can't work at the other stage. It works for its own.
If you've ever wondered how brands like Bacardi and Lululemon make their video content look that good, stay with me for 30 seconds. We're going to take a quick pause from the conversation so I can tell you about our sponsor for today's episode, Big River Film Company, a full-service video production company built for brands that need clear strategy and a smooth production process. Their tagline is actually video content that connects, and connection is kind of our whole thing here, so you can see why this was a natural fit. Based right here in Syracuse and actively serving brands across central New York, Big River brings national level experience to our local market. They've worked with brands like Bacardi, helping create video content around new product launches, as well as household names like Macy's and Lululemon. Whether you're in food and beverage, healthcare, finance, or anything in between, Big River Film Company can help you create video content that moves your audience to action. If video is on your radar for 2026, these are the people to call. Visit bigriverfilmco.com to explore their work and reach out about your next project. Ronald McDonald House Central New York is doing truly incredible work right here in our community, and I'm so grateful to have them supporting the show. Ronald McDonald House Central New York provides families with a nearby place to stay at absolutely no cost while their child is receiving medical care. Because when your child is hospitalized, the last thing you should be worrying about is where you're going to sleep tonight. And the story behind how this organization came to be is one I think everyone needs to hear. More than 50 years ago, a female physician named Dr. Audrey Evans saw a need that no one else was addressing. The families of her young patients had nowhere to stay while their children were in treatment, and she refused to accept that. At a time when women couldn't even get a mortgage on their own, she partnered with a friend and together they made it happen. That is a woman who saw a problem and built the solution herself. What I love even more is that the Ronald McDonald House right here in central New York was born the same way. Parents of children going through treatment saw that same need in their own community and did something about it. That spirit of ordinary people showing up in extraordinary ways is woven into the DNA of this organization from day one. Ronald McDonald House, Central New York, has been led for the past 25 years by CEO Beth Trunfio, and under her leadership, this organization has grown in ways that have changed countless families' lives. I actually had Beth on the podcast recently, and her story and her passion for this mission will stop you in your tracks. Go back to that episode and be sure to give it a listen. And if you want to support this incredible organization in person, join them for Many Hearts, One Home, their annual celebration happening September 25th at SRC Arena right in Syracuse. Details are in the show notes. Go check it out. And thank you, Ronald McDonald House, Central New York, for everything you do. How do you think community fits into human flourishing, or can people flourish in isolation for that matter?
So can people flourish on their own? I'll rephrase that. I think so. And I'll give you the simple example, and I've shared this before. My niece is, almost 6 now. And when she was born, it was during COVID, and they were in California, my wife's brother and sister-in-law. So my wife went to help them because the in-laws were all overseas, couldn't get here. So my wife was gone for 4 months, and I was at home by myself in isolation. And one evening, I'm standing at the kitchen counter, just eating my dinner, scrolling through messages on the phone, or doom scrolling, right? And I look at the dining table, I'm like, ain't that something? I said, if a random stranger walked in right now, I'd probably set the table, we'd have a nice conversation, and we'd have good company. I'm like, well, if a random stranger is worth the 5-star treatment, I'm worth the 5-star treatment. So I took the food, I plated it on one of our nice plates. I took a picture and I sent it to my son who's in college and my wife who's in California. I said, check this out. I'm loving on me right now, right? And I put the phone away. I sat down at the dining table and I had a nice meal. And what I realized was I was with myself, not by myself. And I actually liked myself. And so suddenly I had good company. I had good thoughts, conversation. And then after dinner, I turned on some music. I busted a move, danced, watched something I enjoyed. And so what I realized was you can flourish when you're on your own. However, we also know that the community actually helps us flourish in unique ways that are different, right? So both have value and meaning and purpose. And what we often realize is people get lonely. And you're lonely when you don't acknowledge yourself, when you don't like yourself, when you don't know yourself. The minute that changes, lonely doesn't exist anymore, right? I'm never lonely. I don't feel isolated because I've got good company all the time. And then if I want community, right, I have opportunity. Some people struggle with that, right? Because part of it is the ability to express. Part of it is the ability to feel vulnerable or to be vulnerable. Part of it is the confidence to actually speak out. And part of what you teach with groups, which I love, is speak up. What we don't know is what others are not saying.
Yep.
And the minute we say, what we realize is there's more common ground than not. Across the world, right? Across the world. And so by expressing, you become a light that shines brightly. And suddenly, people end up finding you. They're like, the resonance is there. When we don't express, what you don't know, you don't know.
When you express and you show up and you share, people don't just find you, but I think that it gives them an opportunity to find themselves. And I know that some of the biggest decisions I've ever made in my life, the biggest risks I've ever taken, have only happened because I listened to someone else's story, or I listened to someone have a beautiful conversation with someone that taught me things that I might not have had the opportunity to learn otherwise. And that's a huge reason why I started this podcast. I think it came from a place of me first loving conversation, and I've always been kind of a conversationalist, but also a genuine curiosity for people. And being that I think I carried a lot of imposter syndrome around the fact that I felt less educated than most people I knew having grown up here in the Northeast where higher education is there's a huge emphasis on it and we have some of the best schools around us. I think that my alternative to not having access to higher education was having conversations with as many people as possible. And there's so much power in not just having conversations, but I also think in showing up, sharing your opinion, sharing your light with the world. And there's so many people that I know personally that are some of the most beautiful souls, the brightest lights, some of the most wise, intellectual people that refuse to show up because they feel like speaking up and being seen is not necessary. Maybe it's vain. Maybe it's would be bragging to simply have an opinion or to celebrate their accomplishments. But I even think celebrating your accomplishments publicly is important because what you're doing is you're teaching people that they might come from where you come from. They might be a similar age as you, and they're seeing, oh, wow, this is possible for someone from Syracuse. This is possible for someone who's under 30, but has really big dreams and is super ambitious and maybe is from, a small to mid-sized city, right? That's usually I try to drill that into those people. I'm like, you don't understand. Posting a win on LinkedIn is not bragging. It's important, actually.
It builds momentum, right? So what happens is when you post something that you accomplish, right, you may suddenly get comments from people who are like-minded or on that journey as well.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a few steps ahead, maybe a few steps behind, whatever it is on that road, right? And suddenly you can either be an advisor too, or somebody might actually show you where the potholes are. And now you can have a smoother road towards progressing the message, helping even more people, right? So you think about that, and then you think about the fact that people currently, how do we define success? So what is success? How do you know when you've, quote, arrived, right? Is it that the goal you had set is achieved? Is it that you're transformed as a result of the journey? Is it that you ended up at a different destination that might even be better or just different, right? And are you open? And suddenly, if you're open to it, then there's a joy to it. If you're not, then there's this, right? That little, not good enough, not quite there. It didn't work out. It always works out. It might not be what you expected when you started, but then you let the expectation go. Now you can actually savor the flavor of, right? Versus not even sample because you're like, that's not what I wanted when I started. Yeah, but then, you put raw chicken in an oven, right? And then you cook it. What comes out isn't what went in. And the flavor may not be exactly the same, it might even be better. And every single time I make chai every morning, the flavor is always a little different, right? Based on what I put in, how long I heat it, how long it stays there before I take a sip. Savor the flavor. We were talking earlier, and I think this is an important point in this discussion, is that a lot of people who are, considered to be elite are seeking to be even more than who they've been, or this idea of, more success, longevity, right? I want more. And the thing about wanting more is if you don't value what you have, the more is going to get the same. If you get an extra 1,000 days because you suddenly figured something out for genetics and now you have longevity, but you've never learned the value today, all those 1,000 days are going to be the same. And so since I was a trainee 30 plus years ago, the understanding that I had is contentment and peace, right? The ultimate, what I consider to be the ultimate needs. Everything else is a want. If your wants take away from your contentment and peace, think about where your priorities lie, right? And contentment and peace aren't the same for you when you're 20, 25, 30, 35. We constantly have to come back, and most people don't think about this stuff. And so then they're always seeking, dissatisfied, not enough, longing, right? Wanting until they recognize, I have. Once you recognize what you have and value it, then everything can be of value. When you don't value it, none of it is of value, right?
Yeah.
And it's a mindset shift.
I really relate to that. I would consider myself being someone who identifies as a growth-minded individual who's always looking to be the best version of themselves and always looking to be better, grow, become more efficient, make the most of my effort and time, and how can I learn more AI so I can get more done?
That's right.
All of the things. I'm totally subscribed to this culture of productivity and biohacking and all the things. And I think it's great. It's cool. I could be subscribed to other lifestyles that maybe wouldn't be so honorable.
Right.
However, I think this idea of contentment and acceptance and having to weigh what that means to you as you go through different phases or maybe reach different levels of success is important. And I think that when life is moving so fast and you do have so much momentum and things are coming together so quickly, it's hard to slow down long enough to decide, am I happy? Am I content? Do I have peace? Or am I just on the hamster wheel of constantly striving for success?
And then you shift that to I am happy, I am content, right? I am at peace, right? So when you ask the question, if you flip it into the answer itself, right, then in the moment you can be. So the idea of be here now, let the mud settle. And if we're constantly working on that, having goals, but at each moment in that journey, recognize that each moment is an endpoint unto itself and the result of. And so often I'm looking over there that I'm actually missing this. If we start to reckon, like this moment right now, right? Think about how many years this has been in the making between just us, right? I think 24 was when I was looking at our emails, like 24 was when I almost had a time set and then we didn't. And so there's a journey. And in that journey, that the beauty of the moment is so lost on us because we're so goal oriented. That's how we've been trained ever since we've been conscious, right? In a sense, right? Because when we're infants, where we're not actively, look at how at peace they are. I just had a 11-month-old nephew visit. That kid didn't have a care in the world, was doing his thing. And there was just joy or there wasn't, but it was in the moment, emotion, expression, right? Elation, all of it. And then you sit there and we're like, yeah, now I've got it. Next, I've got it. What's my agenda for the day? It's like, bro, man, just chill. Like, can you be here now and actually just pause for the moment and think, wow. And yes, there's a lot of chaos in the world. There's a lot of, distress in the world. Yeah, in this specific moment, if I could just find value for this moment, that shifts so much. That 1 degree, that 1 second, right? That one breath can shift so much for a person just simply by letting that mud settle. Valuing the moment, valuing the self, valuing the connection, right? And suddenly you have infinite in the moment, right? Because what is time but a human construct, right? And if we don't know how to value a singular moment, who cares about the 1,000? The minute you can value a singular moment, all those are bonus moments. And then you don't care about the 1,000 because you're already valuing it. So the one keeps wanting the 1,000, not valuing this. The other could care less about the 1,000 because they've already got the value. And that shift is life-changing.
Do you think that for some of these individuals that we're talking about, these quote unquote elite, do you think that there might be a fear around the idea of slowing down because it might cost them something, or they might have to negotiate on their desires or goals?
Again, I'm not judging because wonderful people, right, in all domains. But I think ego, expectation, pride, self-image, right, identity, those all are sometimes more fragile than we realize, right? Because they're attached to a certain expectation. And for some people, they can't get the expectation and that attachment to it out of their head. And the minute you do, and for me, you know when it happened? I was in a 6-year medical program, thought I had the best resume coming out of high school. And my second semester, I failed. I failed out of college and out of a medical school. My expectation, my attachment to, my assumption of who I was were all gone. And then I realized, yeah, but this is who I am. Like, this isn't just I want to be this thing and I have to be in this box. This is just my natural instinct, that of a healer. So I'm just going to continue walking the walk because this is who I am. It's my natural walk. And it was a completely different path to, get here, sitting here today. But in that process, I had to release the expectation, the attachment to an identity, right? To a persona. And for some people, for all of us, it's scary until you've been through it. Then what you realize is it's not that scary when you lean into, when you double down on, right? And when you trust that the universe is always right. We just don't know it in the moment. And it's not about the things we have, right? It's about how open we are to accepting and to forgiving, right? And frankly, every 7 years, every cell in our body is new, right? So literally, you're not the same physical person. So why do you keep attached to an identity of somebody who you're not anymore? Let them rest in peace. Get to know this person because soon this person is going to be gone. And then you'll wish you had more time with. Why not have it now?
Yeah, that's such a good point, especially if we are holding on to maybe some of the mistakes that we made in our, I'm thinking 7 years ago, I was 21. So, and as you described that, I realized in the moment that there is still some guilt and shame and maybe even disgust over like who I was and what I was doing and how I thought and what I believed when I was 21. For someone listening to this who might be struggling with identity and an attachment to an identity that has everything to do with what they do for a living, the clothes that they wear on their back, the car that they're driving, the kind of people that they get to call friends, really everything outside of themselves. Someone who's struggling with identity because of these things, I would assume as such that they don't feel okay without all these things or just simply on their own. How do they find their way back to themselves? How do they grow that love and acceptance?
So again, I love the way you phrase things because it's like layered, which I love, right? So the idea of finding your way back to yourself, that's one of the misconceptions because there's no back to, because you're constantly transforming, right? I won't say moving forward or backwards, but the thing is we're constantly transforming. We're constantly flourishing, if you want to say, blooming, right? So you're not going back to anything. The key is to embrace who you are in the moment and not expect becoming a certain thing. You can continue to nurture with the qualities that you want to, with the flavors that you want to. And then if you expect that it will turn into this exactly, that's the fallacy. Just like that, I want to get back to, right? We have people, I just had a patient last week who had a stroke. And they're like, I got to get back to. Like, you're not. Can you make the most of? Sure. Can you continue to thrive? Sure. Can you flourish still? Absolutely. But the getting back to is the fallacy. And the judging the past self is a fallacy. Why? Because they did the best with what they knew then, right? Let them rest in peace. The minute you judge, you keep that persona alive within you, but that means they're occupying a space that limits your potential for embracing who you are today, right? So look at that. I just got closer into the microphone, right? Obviously, this is meaningful.
Well, I want to let you know I am taking notes.
That's good.
And we're going to pull a clip for that one.
Absolutely.
That was good.
I mean, judgment is the issue. We judge our past selves. We critique. We criticize. We label. And I remember when my son was younger, and he's 24 now, right? And, one time we had a discussion, and I was like, we've done the best we could with what we knew then. We didn't know then what we know now. And so as we say things to you now, it's based on the experience in between. So we're constantly transforming as parents, as people, right? I've never raised or fathered a 24-year-old before. So even the advice I give him now, it's my first time, right? I've advised people for 30 plus years who have 24-year-old children. But then when you're the dad giving the advice, is there consistency? Are there nuances? I've never done this before. So it's always new for me too as a parent. I'm also growing. I'm just a 54-year-old kid growing up. I have a kid who's 24 growing up and a wife who's 52 growing up, right? She doesn't mind me sharing her age. She looks like 32, so it's all good.
I think age,
It's a number.
we need to rebrand age, but
Yeah.
that could be another
And I celebrated.
podcast
I actually
episode.
celebrated because you know what? Every birthday, I'm like, heck yeah, man. Like, oh, but you want people to know? I'm like, yeah, I want them to know because you
Yeah.
know what? I've lived all of it. I have one son, but I've had 1,000 because the newborn left me for the 2-year-old who left me the 4-year-old. They had different language, different dreams, different goals. You, the 21-year-old, and you today, right? Two different people with two different languages, two different goals, right? So you've been 1,000 people. Let the other 999 rest in peace so you can actually embrace this lady in front of me today and you can get to know her. Because tomorrow it's going to be a different person.
Yeah.
Enjoy this.
Enjoy her company.
Right? And enjoy is I-N joy and it's E-N joy, right? So enjoy.
I love that. I am really curious about your book. Obviously, the contents of it I want to get into, but more so, I have this new, curiosity around people who've published books and who've written books. I'm really curious about what your process looked like for that and what that experience felt like for you. Little Kaushal, did he know he was going to write a book someday or no?
Nope. Little Kaushal always was going to be a doctor. Ever since I was like 4 that I can remember I was going to be a doctor. But, the goals changed over time. And then when little Kaushal had a son who was 2, and I thought, you know what? I want to leave something, the messaging, because at that point I had been a physician in practice for a few years. I had been a rural doc. I had lived all over the world. I had minored in philosophy in college, so I've studied the Bible and the Old Testament, the Quran, the Hindu Gita, a lot on Buddhism. So I was like, the pearls, right? The contentment and peace message. I wanted my son to have that so that he could have joy throughout the stages of his life and not feel the strain of childhood or teenage or, all the hormonal upheavals that happen that we can't control. And I didn't want to control it. At the same time, I wanted to give him a pathway. The Buddha had found a path that he shared with the world. He didn't say it was the only way. He said, this is what I found. Feel free, right? And so that was what I was going to do was this is what I know. Feel free. And so when he was 2, I started writing. And the original title was going to be Balance, Buffers, and Buddhism. Right? And the idea was balance in life and buffers because at that time I didn't even know it, but hara hachi bu is a Japanese principle of 80%. Right? So when you're 80% full, you walk away. Obviously, some days I haven't, right? And then financially, live at 80% of your income. Buffer, scheduling. I've worked 4 days a week most of my life. At that time, I didn't even know that I was hara hachi buing it, right? But that was 80%. And so I had these concepts. Buddhism, for me, was like water, the flow, because Buddhism talks a lot about water. And Bruce Lee talked about water and the idea that, you fill a cup with water and it becomes the cup, right, or the glass. And the reality is it doesn't become the glass, it stays water. But water in solid, liquid, or gas never loses its core. And yet it can adapt to the situation. And when it needs to be the tsunami, it can be. When it needs to be a gentle brook, it can be. And so to be like water was a message that I would share with people, right? And so I started writing. And then suddenly he was 14. And I hadn't done much to finish it. I had a bunch of notes. So my wife said, if you actually finish it, I'll publish it. And she had no publishing background. And she's designed the cover. She learned how to self-publish. She was the editor to give me feedback, the layperson feedback on, I'm thinking it. She's like, no, doesn't make sense. No, your language is too science-based, right? And so we worked on it, and it was a great bonding experience for us as well. And so 10 years ago, actually, this is the 10-year anniversary, we published it. And then I did books 2 and 3, which were on this concept of who am I? And for 104 days, I woke up every morning and just reflected on who am I? One day I was a snowflake. One day I was an evergreen tree. One day I was a wolf, which is my animal spirit. One day I was a deep blue sea. Whatever came to mind, I would write about the qualities of it, right? And then I used to post on Instagram. And like 30 days in, my wife was like, why don't you just make these into like 2, books or something? I said, I can make 2 books of weekly reflections, inspirations for people on the concept of who am I? And what that helps us to understand is I have the potential to be anything. If I'm rooted in my space as of today, I can sprout into any direction. A tree, the branches go in all directions. Each one of them had the potential to be any one of them. And so we as humans have the potential to bloom into any direction that we lean into and that we nurture. And so I did that. The next book is going to be, it might be a book or it may be a series of podcasts also called Rules of Engagement, which is really about relationships. And it came from veterans. So I've taken care of a lot of veterans over the years, and I'm always grateful for their service. But veterans come back and violence by and against them is really high. Part of it is because when they go to battle or in the battlefield, there are rules of engagement. And oftentimes, those are stuck in their head when they come back. And now in social context, they don't necessarily apply the same. What I learned was the Hindu Gita is a soldier in the middle of a battlefield who puts his bow and arrow down and says, can't do it, because both sides were his family. And so his charioteer, Krishna, reminds him of his duty as a soldier, rules of engagement for that role and in that relationship. Husbands and wives have rules of engagement, different roles. Father and daughters, right? Mothers and sons, mothers and daughters, right? Co-workers, right? Co-podcasters, right? There are rules of engagement in every relationship. And if we walk in understanding the rules of engagement and sharing them, then there's a smoother journey in the relationship. And by keeping that ladder together with the rungs, now as we transform as individuals, we can continue to evolve those rules of engagement based on who we're becoming, right? It happens in the work of patients and doctors, same thing. There are rules of engagement. And so the goal is to share, because I think the context that we started off with of people struggling, right, with relationships, right, with commitment, right? A lot of that has to do with unspoken rules of engagement.
Yeah.
Right? Internal expectation, right? Assumption, right? Attachment to an identity and a persona. And the minute we recognize that we can build something that creates a common ground that's ours, right? Unique to us, then in each of our relationships, we can thrive.
Yeah. I can't tell you how many times my own inability, or just not necessarily inability, but lack of follow through when it comes to communication and transparency and just simply boundary setting in relationships, vocalizing what are the rules of engagement here. I can't tell you how many times that has gotten me into trouble, or that has caused my own suffering in relationship. And I think a lot of us aren't taught how to do that in relationship. Maybe some of us have never even seen that done before, and relationships just simply were always dysfunctional, the relationships that were presented to us. And I have, become aware of this recently. I have asked myself, how can I make my boundaries known right up front, make my expectations or needs known right up front, so I don't have to have the uncomfortable conversation of, hey, you aren't meeting my needs. Hey, I'm disappointed. Or, hey, I don't really like the dynamic here, or how this conversation went. I would prefer something different. And I think that one of the reasons why I have fallen short on this is because maybe I haven't actually taken the time to figure out what are my rules of engagement, or the rules of engagement I would like to have in a romantic relationship, or a friendship, or in a business relationship with someone on my team. And I think first you need to figure that out,
And
right?
so it's the starting with self, right? What are my rules of engagement with myself, right? My thoughts. We were talking earlier, and I can say this here, right? We're talking about how, we might have a donut and call it a cheat meal, when in fact it was actually a celebration in the moment, right? Can I reframe in my own mind thoughts about myself and how I communicate with myself? Because when I practice that, then it's easier to connect and share with others. This is the way I approach things, right? I'm a positivist. I see the glass as half full. That was my high school yearbook quote, right? Before even studying all this philosophy. A half empty glass is also half full. For me, the mindset is to build from, see the value in, versus seeing the deficit in and then rejecting, discarding. Internally, if I do the discarding and rejecting, Biochemically, it's actually a pro-aging thing. Cortisol goes up, adrenaline's up, dopamine, serotonin are down. So the science itself says that when we're proactive about our self-expression and our view of ourselves and our conversation in our head, it's a different lived experience. And then if you're that way, you recognize who you're becoming and who you are, naturally your expression is going to be that when you're in relation with another, right? And over time, even if you don't overtly say, what they'll get is an understanding of your expression. Like you figured out when we were talking before this, as I kept saying, well, here's a reframe. All right, so this guy, this is the way he views things, right? And either the other person will then adapt, or they may say, wow, it's interesting that this is how you do it, because here's what my mind says. Now suddenly we have open conversation, open communication. And we see where each other is. And if there's a disconnect, we can build a bridge to understand better, right? So I think you're spot on. And I think the first step is that internal piece, right? The rules of engagement with myself. What conversation? Thoughts come and go. What you hold on to, that's a rule of engagement. So I may have a negative thought. I may have anger that pops up. A study 6-7 months ago showed that at 90 seconds, any emotion you feel, the brain is diminishing the intensity at 90 seconds. So the only reason you're still stuck there is why? You keep relighting the fire, right? I've always told people 30 seconds to bring your mind back, because whatever you're upset about was that, not this. The brain gives you 90 seconds, right? To ruminate. But recognize that in 90 seconds, you can either ruminate and stay fixated on that thing, or you use that 90 seconds to 1 degree of change. Reframe.
Yeah.
Because the brain's going to take care of the negative side of things, or the elation, whatever emotion you're feeling, right? So in the moment, can you reframe and bring yourself back? And now value this moment, right? Be here now versus being there and staying there. It's proactive work that over time becomes natural instinct. Habits form over time, right? And so the discipline, the consistency over time suddenly starts to reframe how you become that different person. So can a person, be trained to flourish? Absolutely, when there's an open conversation, even within open acknowledgement of the thought of the moment. Because we have so many thoughts that we don't even pay attention to. When you start paying attention to your thoughts and start recognizing the patterns, then you can make 1 degree change. Now the pattern's different. It's no longer that if it wasn't serving you well.
Yeah. And I think a lot of what I had just described and a lot of my suffering in relationship because of my lack of communication or lack of proactiveness when it comes to my expectations or needs. In my head, it's funny. I think the solution to this is getting crystal clear on all of these things and then making it known right off the bat so I don't have to have a single uncomfortable conversation. But obviously that is so unrealistic. And to be in relationship is to be open, and you have to remain open, and you also have to accept the fact that I think one of the most beautiful things about relationships is that they give you an opportunity to learn more about yourself.
Yeah.
And to learn more about what your desires actually are. I say this all the time. It's such a gift to know what you don't want. And it's so much more important than having a feeling of what you do want, right? And I think that relationships give us that opportunity to realize what you will not tolerate.
And for me, my 2 needs, contentment and peace, right? Those are 2 things I won't give up to anyone, right? I will give you the shirt off my back, but I will not give up my contentment and peace. So now it's not even about what I want or don't want. It's what I know, what I need, right? And then building off of that foundation in all circumstances. So what happens is every relationship has an optimal distance. Too close can be a lot of conflict, friction. Too far apart, you don't quite connect. You find that right balance and there's harmony. And it's not always easy to adjust the other's perspective or position, but you can adjust yours. And so my barometer is my contentment and peace, right? And that's where I kind of, go, because that makes the most sense. And more importantly, in every relationship, the constant is me. for me, for my relationships, right? So if I'm not contented and at peace, the relationship by definition does not have a chance to have contentment and peace because I'm a part of that equation. The minute I'm content and at peace, the relationship has potential because I'm a part of that equation. And so working on the self has a lot of value in healthy relationships because if you show up with a presence that is contented, rooted in contentment and peace, one spoke is already said, right? One post is there. And then the other figures out the balance for themselves. And if they're contented in peace and you're contented in peace, now it's so much easier to have a relationship, right? Because you look at the common ground. But if neither one is, it's hard. If one is and the other doesn't like that or it struggles with that because it's so different from what they would define it, well, open communication helps to figure out the common ground again.
Yeah. And I think the only way to have this open, to be able to, I know for me personally, is there has to be some level of trust. But then I ask myself, how is trust established? What comes first, the chicken or the egg? What comes first, vulnerability or trust, right?
So I would say vulnerability.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you.
I would agree.
Yeah, simple example.
You need to be I think that's the risk that we all take in order to have a beautiful relationship, right? Is you have to be willing to take the risk of vulnerability. That's like, that is your job if you want to have a fruitful relationship.
5 years into our marriage, I woke my wife up at like 3 or 4 in the morning and I said, I finally figured it out. And she goes, it's 4 in the morning, like go back to bed, right? And I said, I finally figured out you're meant to be the guide in my life. I just haven't accepted it yet. And in that moment, the clarity and the realization was I was chasing a bunch of things at that stage of life. Goals, this, that, and she was helping me to recognize, just be here now, right? Like, this is enough, right? And I wasn't having it because I was like, I got to be a doctor, then I got to be able to practice, I got to do this, I got to do that. And she was like, just be with me. And when I got married, we had actually talked about this, that I told her, I said, we got engaged. We spoke for 45 minutes. 2 days later, we were engaged. We went to India.
I love it.
Yeah. And the next day we were on a walk and I said, I'm living on bonus time. Yeah. And she goes, what does that mean? And I said, well, you fulfilled my last want, right? I wanted to be married, etc. And so now everything else is bonus, right? No expectation, acceptance of all as a gift, right? And that was a great shift, right? And what I've learned in transitioning into like the career path and in business and relationship building is I tend to share with my patients when I meet them, I will share my life story first. And then I'll ask them to share their life story before we get in their medical history. It gives me context. But by my sharing it first, I've shown some vulnerability. I could hide behind the white coat and say, I'm Dr. Nanavati. Yeah. You can look me up online, but you don't need to know we're here about you. It's not about me. But actually, it's about us in that room. We're building a relationship. And in order to build that relationship, we need to know each other. You need to understand me. I need to understand you, the person. Not the diabetes, not the hypertension, but actually who you are. What are your dreams? What are your hopes? What are your goals? Where do you come from? Who have you been? The 80-year-old in a nursing home could have been a CEO, right? Or could have been a great gardener or whatever. They've traveled the world, whatever it is. That context helps me to understand who they are and what brings them contentment and peace and joy and bliss. And so in these relationships, when we meet people, when we have, group sessions, organized events, right? The idea of speed dating is a wonderful one, which is life stories.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful way to get to know people for people, not the, oh, you run this, oh, you're the CEO of that, oh, you've built this. That's nice. Here's who you are. Here's the kid. The first conversation we had a few years ago was us just sharing life stories, right? It wasn't a, hey, you got this goal. That came at the end of the learning the life stories and then where we had common ground. But the first part of it was, hey, here's who I am. I want to know you.
I think that's so beautiful. And that is why I started this podcast. I think that, and I have been proven to be correct about this, the power, I think all of the power lies is right in people's life story, in their journey, hearing how they got to where they are, not talking about the success, or the strategies. It's truly is like, where did you come from? What was your childhood like? What did you like? How did you like to spend your time? Who was one person that made the biggest impact on you as a child? What were the things you interested in? What did you think that you would be doing right now that you're not doing at all? And, I was proven to be correct at our last supper club that we hosted. We decided to go to Saratoga Springs. This was like the first event that we hosted outside of Central New York. And typically how our supper club goes is we decide a specific topic or area of business to dive into. And then we kind of source our speakers from that topic. Who's the best person in this area to speak on this particular thing? I think we were talking about operations and systems. And it just so happened that we had an incredible lineup of speakers, all women from the Saratoga area. And I had this entire panel discussion with all these incredible questions, all about, I was like, whoever attends this event is going to walk away with such great,
I've got a plan,
with all new workflows and systems and tools to use. And I ended up reading off a bio for like the first speaker, and then just to introduce them to the audience. And then the second speaker was like, you don't have to read my bio. I'll just tell you guys who I am. And it ended up creating this like movement during this event where like it was so beautiful to hear from this woman's mouth who she was and where she came from. So then this last speaker I had to introduce after that decided to do the same thing. And then the first speaker, who I introduced reading her bio off a piece of paper, was like, you know what? I want to do it too. I want to tell you guys a little bit more.
That's right.
And these women ended up sharing like what life was like growing up, sharing vulnerable pieces of their childhood and maybe some of the struggles that they dealt with that certainly contributed to their ambition or their drive. They shared about their family structures that were non-traditional and how many kids they have and how old they were. And I think that these are all details that our attendees were truly interested in. And these are the details that allow people who are sitting in the audience, looking up at the people on stage, to actually feel connected.
Yeah,
to
it
those
humanizes
speakers.
the speaker from being this thing to a person.
Yeah. Right? And it ended up being that, all the time that it took for these women to tell their stories, we were out of time for the panel. So I was like, all right, guys, actually, that's all the time we have. Now we're going to go into like the guided table conversation here. And I realized in that moment, I'm like, why haven't we been doing this the whole time? That's where the power is hearing who these people are. So we decided, instead of doing, we had a little bit of time for it when everyone was done to do like the guided prompted questions at the table. But we ended up just like having everyone at this supper club go one by one and do the same thing and share where are you right now?
That's it.
Where did you come from? And I think that was our best supper club to date, because I felt fired up. I felt so inspired and just energized by hearing these people's stories. But I also know that everyone who attended this event felt the same way. And not only did they get to hear incredible stories, but they got to tell theirs.
Yeah.
And I think that there's so much value in being able to share your story with other people that are truly interested.
And once it's modeled, it's easier, right?
Absolutely.
Because otherwise you're like, I don't know where to start. I don't know what to say. I'll ask people their life story and they'll start with, well, I was diagnosed with it. I'm like, no, that's not your life story, right? Where were you born?
Yeah.
Start there. Where did you grow up?
And that's
right?
why you do it first.
And that's
now.
why I do it first. I was born in India, and then I go through, that process. And, depending on the person, I'll share different bits that I know will connect us better as well, right? Like, I'm a physician, and, if I tell somebody I lived in subsidized housing growing up as an Indian immigrant, like they wouldn't have a clue, right? And so suddenly that's a different part of me. They wouldn't even know. But then it connects differently, right? They view me differently. And so I think there's so much power, and we so often script things. And unfortunately, many times in events, it limits the conversation. And the minute we let people go, right, there's a natural flow. And the thing is, then it's never enough time.
Yeah.
There's never enough time.
People can talk
Yes.
forever.
Yeah.
Which is beautiful. That's what you want. You want to be the match that lights that.
And of course, you have the art of facilitation is
Yeah, it's
that
hard.
one person doesn't do the hour speaking that everybody gets a chance to.
Yes.
Because sometimes people come and they're like really seeking to want to just dump it all out there, right?
Yeah.
And you have to navigate
You have
that
to put
part.
some.
But they also actually need to be heard. It's just a different venue for them. They might need a one-on-one or something like that. But in group settings, the idea of having some seed, some spark, as you said, the match that kind of just spark that lights the match, then let it flow. Right? It's amazing what we learn, right? About ourselves too, right? Like when you're with a group of people and suddenly you have a conversation and you're like, oh, you live in Arizona and I'm here. And yet we have so much in common. And like this thing brought us together. But now we have a connection that will last much longer. It's beautiful.
I think that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you again for tuning into today's conversation. I just wanted to let you know that Cultivate is now on Substack. After you subscribe, you'll get weekly episodes sent straight to your inbox. And once a month, a bonus newsletter from me where I share what I'm personally learning and navigating on leadership, community building, mindset, and building a mission-driven business. No highlight reel, no pretending I have it all figured out, just what's true in real time. You can find the link to subscribe in the show notes. I'd love for you to be a part of it. Okay, now back to the conversation. Kaushal, this has been such an incredible conversation. I am like, it's been so beautiful and like I fully expected it to be, but like I'm feeling fired up. I just hope that I know that whoever's listening to this is feeling it as well. Where can people follow you, connect with you, buy your book, Core 4 of Wellness, if they want to stay connected?
So the book is on Amazon, so they can find it there.
We'll be sure to add it to the show notes too, so they can just go there.
Absolutely. And then, I do post things online between LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram as well. And there's a YouTube channel that I've created with, just Kaushal Nanavati podcast. And so podcasts that I've done before are there. But I like to speak in community. I like to engage with people. There's never been a stage that's too big or a microphone that I haven't enjoyed having in hand. And it makes it fun. Like one of the, if you manifest, one of the things that I always joke about manifesting is filling, our dome here, the JMG Wireless Dome.
I love that.
Give me a microphone and step out the way and the K-Daddy will rock it, right? So
I love that manifestation. I think that's a great goal.
Yeah. So, the point is to be available is important. I think the message every time I speak, I like to give the bottom line up front so that even if they never connected with me again, they understand. Reflect on contentment and peace at this stage of your life and then re-examine every so often. Am I still? Is this the next 5-year plan? And if not, what does contentment and peace look like? And then the one master key to the whole thing that we didn't get into, which might be a whole separate thing, unconditional love. To have it be unconditional is to pour the overflow into the world, right? Not to empty the cup, it's the overflow. And then what they choose to do with it is up to them. No expectation of how it'll be received, no expectation of it coming back, right? Acceptance, forgiveness, unconditionally. And if people do that, their lived experience will be that much more enriched. And then wherever the journey takes them, it's unique to them.
I love it. We'll be sure to leave all the links to your website, social profiles, your YouTube channel in the show notes. And if you're listening to this, feel free to comment on this episode. Tell us what you think. What was your favorite part? I'm sure people are going to want you back on Cultivate.
We'll do it.
Thank you, Kaushal.
This is great. Thanks for having me.
All right, guys, that's it for this week's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in to Cultivate CNY. If you enjoyed this conversation, I'd love it if you left us a quick review and made sure you're subscribed so you never miss an episode. And if something in today's discussion resonated with you, please share it, whether it's on social media or directly with a friend. You never know how hearing this conversation might be exactly what someone needs right now. And I love to hear your feedback. I love to hear your thoughts. So please be sure to tag us on social media if you do share there.